So, What If finally finished airing all its episodes, and I thought it would be pretty fun to rank all of them. This video was actually decided upon by you guys, where I had y'all do a poll that I held asking what videos you guys wanted to see first, and ranking the What If episodes 1.
I love democracy.
I think this is something I'm going to do pretty often now, and I just put up a new poll yesterday, so if you guys want to partake in that, just look at the community tab on my channel and look for future polls. And for the fun things to watch for Halloween video, if you guys leave suggestions for that, either in this video or the poll comment section, I'll feature your comment in that video. Could be a movie, TV show, just a singular episode, whatever. And if you guys enjoyed today's video, please remember to leave a like and subscribe, and follow my social media to stay updated with my content. Alright, let's get into it. At number 9 I have What If Captain Carter Were the First Avenger. Now this one already had me kinda skeptical once I first heard about it, because when I think of what if stories, I sort of think about stuff like Flashpoint, like what if Barry Allen's mother never died? What would happen then? And then all these cool little ripple effects began to take place, and I think it's sort of cool to think about how one tiny change can drastically change a scenario. But the thing with the Captain Carter episode is that it's literally just the first Captain America movie, but with Peggy instead of Steve. Character swapping people is already an interesting premise for me in regards to a what if, but it can work sometimes if the characters are different enough to change the stakes. However, the thing with this premise is that Peggy and Steve are so alike in terms of morality and idealism that it really doesn't change much. I mean, they were a destined couple for a reason, and that's because they're so similar to each other, so when you swap them out, not a lot changes, and the episode perfectly showcases that. Episode 1 really is just the first Avenger, but condensed into 30 minutes, which leaves the episode feeling extremely rushed and unearned. There are moments where there's just clip shows and montages of the events we've already seen, and the episode is practically going beat for beat like the movie, besides the ending. And then there's just weird stuff like, why and how did Howard Stark build an Iron Man suit already? He wasn't working on it in the first Avenger, and how would Peggy becoming Cap change that? Normally I wouldn't do small nitpicks like that, however, a big appeal of the premise of this series is thinking about how that one tiny change can cause all these other events to happen. But rather it just feels like the writers aren't thinking about that in this episode, and just did whatever they wanted. And also the episode just feels so tonally off. There's this weird mix of drama, whimsical / cartoonish comedy, and that mixed with the extremely rushed pace and poor voice acting made for a very bad watching experience. But again, what I mostly don't like about this episode is just the sheer fact of how unoriginal it is, which is more of a shame because there's literally an endless amount of stories and opportunities they could go with, so wasting an episode on this was disappointing. At number 8 I have Party Thor. Now this episode doesn't do anything offensively bad or anything, and one thing I can respect about this episode is that it is 100% a comedy through and through. Unlike the Captain Carter thing, which seemed like it couldn't decide exactly what the tone should be, that and this episode doesn't recite the first events, it actually shows us a lot of new stuff that we ordinarily wouldn't be able to see. With that being said, it's just not for me. Again, they could do so many interesting stories with the what if concept, but they keep doing these randomly generic ideas. Like, do I really care about what if Thor just became a silly party guy? Not really. Especially since this Thor doesn't really seem all that different from the Thor we know. I mean, apart from the lazy and immatureness, the mannerisms are pretty much the same as the Thor from Ragnarok. I just want the writers to delve deeper into cooler ripple effects, and they can still make it a comedy too. For example, there was the scrapped idea, I believe, of what if Tony never made it through the portal after sending the nuke into space in the first Avengers movie. I think that's a really cool concept that could lead to really interesting ideas. And the concept was that he would land as a car, I think, and eventually run into Numero, where it would be a fun comedic episode. Here we could see some logical ripple effects of the what ifs, but still keep it strictly comedic. But the Party Thor episode doesn't lead to any interesting consequences, besides Fury calling Captain Marvel to go check Thor out. All in all, it's not insufferable or anything, I just wonder why the writers even bothered with this concept, to be honest. At number 7 I have What If Killmonger Rescued Tony Stark. Now this one actually had an interesting concept to me, because it sort of seemed plausible since at this time period, Killmonger would be serving in the military. And what if he knew Tony was going to get attacked and went to intervene? Which actually does lead to a lot of interesting little ripple effects of Killmonger killing Black Panther, Rhodey, Tony, and working his way up to Wakanda. However, I do feel like the writing was a tad lazy sometimes. For example, would Tony really be believing this guy he never met before so much? I mean, in this very same episode, Tony finds out that Obadiah Stane has been using him and was plotting to kill him. And once he sees that Killmonger outed him out, Tony then promotes Killmonger to the highest position possible. Like, does he not see anything fishy about this guy he never met doing all this miraculous stuff for him? I mean, some guy was literally just caught using Tony right before this, and his response is to start trusting some guy he barely knows this much? And I don't know, maybe again I'm nitpicking or expecting a bit too much, but it sort of bugs me. And towards the second half of this episode, it just feels like, what if Killmonger ended up gaining the trust of Wakanda and succeeding in his plans? And if that was the end goal, I think a better scenario would have just been, what if Killmonger ended up truly killing T'Challa in Black Panther? What would Killmonger's domination look like after that? Because this episode builds right up to that, and then it ends right when it happens. It just feels a little pointless by the end of it. Like, we just see all this build up to a plan that he already had in Black Panther, but then it ends right when it gets good. I don't know, it was just a little disappointing to me if I'm being honest. At number 6, I have What If the Watcher Broke His Oath. So admittedly, this episode had a pretty tough act to follow, because the preceding episode did a lot to build the stakes and tension, which you'll hear me talk about later. The premise is that the Watcher realizes how screwed he is and decides to recruit a couple of heroes in different universes so that they can help him fight Ultron. The thing with this episode is that it basically showed me the main issue I have with this show, and maybe even Marvel as a whole. And that's that everything needs to tie into some bigger picture. I was more than happy with the fact that these were just one-off anthology stories. I didn't need them to tie into something grander where they fight a bad guy in the end. I really don't need to see a T'Challa Star-Lord spin-off, with all respect to Chadwick Boseman of course. I don't need to see Peggy Carter getting more episodes in What If, or whatever. Again, the main appeal for this show for me was the fact that we can get a brand new story that's filled with unlimited potential. But now we're gonna waste more episodes on characters and concepts we've already seen. I don't know, man, I don't really like that. But again, the episode is pretty fine by itself. There's some good action, funny moments, amazing art direction, and it's entertaining. Some stuff that weirded me out though is that Ultron is pretty underpowered. In the previous episode, he's literally blowing up planets left and right and handling extremely powerful people with ease, but now he's having trouble. And the Watcher's Oath thing just doesn't make much sense to me. Like, I wouldn't have questioned it if it just remained a simple anthology, but since they insisted on expanding the lore, it ended up creating some potential plot holes. Because why does the Watcher even have to follow his oath? It gets tremendously broken during the episode where a literal galaxy gets eaten by Ultron, several realities get shattered because of him, yet it doesn't really matter to the Watcher. So after this, it makes sense for him to break his oath, but at the end of the season, it seems like he's back to following his oath again, for whatever reason. And then he breaks it again to send Black Widow to another universe. Like, bruh, just go all in on following the oath or breaking it, because this ain't making sense.
We're just stories to you. We're not real.
You are more than that to me.
Are we?
You, your stories, they are everything to me.
What? I mean, I get the sentiment, but bruh, you just reaffirm what she said in a nicer way, I don't think. At number 5, I have What If Zombies. I have mixed feelings on this one, because at one hand, it is pretty cool seeing zombies, and they actually do go pretty hard in some of the scenes. The art direction is also really cool, and I like a lot of the concepts the episode goes with. For instance, I like how a lot of these characters survive because of the Pimtech stuff, so they travel in small cars to avoid being seen by the zombies. The tension is also pretty high as we actually see important characters actively die in this episode. And I also really love seeing unorthodox teams and survivors. Like, who would have thought this random Russian guy from Ant-Man would have lasted as long as he did, or a one-headed Ant-Man floating with Doctor Strange's cape? I just personally think that's really cool. However, the issue I have with this episode are the major tonal issues. So part of this is trying to delve into the cool zombie stuff and show off some violence, gore, and nihilism, but the other part is basically trying to be a straight-up comedy. And it doesn't work at all and is honestly just kind of cringe. Like, our main characters are dying and the writers are trying to make silly whimsical jokes out of it. Like, how do y'all want me to feel here?
Right?
They did my man Happy dirty. Also, Bucky is basically a complete sociopath as he sees his good friend Sam get spliced into two right in front of him, yet he just says,
I should be sad, but I'm not.
Let's go.
or even worse when he kills his lifelong best friend Steve Rogers, makes a quip, and then just moves on with his life. Like, what the heck? Characters just do not act normally, and the comedy to these extremely dire situations really does come off as sociopathic more than anything else.
Guys, I'm covered in Sharon.
The kid has hand sanitizer.
What the fuck?
The only time I kind of appreciated the humor was when it was from Spider-Man, and that's because humor is such an integral part to his character, and this really showcases it. Peter sort of uses his humor as a way of coping with his problems and remaining hopeful, and this episode really understood that, and I also really appreciated that Uncle Ben reference. I also like the twist with Vision luring Avengers or just any innocent people here so that he can feed Wanda. Like, that's really messed up and twisted, and I know that part is from the comics, but I appreciated that they adapted that. Also, again, the voice acting is a bit of an issue sometimes.
My king, Wakanda forever!
Which kinda just goes to show that just because these guys are great actors doesn't automatically equate to them being great voice actors. But all in all, I think the episode is still pretty riveting and entertaining for what it does do. I just wish that they didn't undercut it with so much humor. And I know I said I'm kind of against expanding on what if scenarios, but this one was left so open-ended that I really wouldn't mind if they chose to expand a bit further into this universe. At number 4, I have what if T'Challa becomes Star-Lord. So at first I was kinda against this idea because I don't think scenarios where we just character swap people are that interesting, especially since it's such a random swap. However, I kind of love what they did with this premise. The overall theme of this episode is that if you're simply just a kind person, then you can quite literally change the universe. My man T'Challa was so nice and likable that he convinced Thanos to not eradicate half of the universe by simply talking to him. This is where I'm okay with things not logistically making sense because the vibe of this episode is whimsical, comedic, and wholesome. It doesn't have to make sense, and that's totally okay. This episode gave me a lot of Paddington vibes, where it's just very wholesome and nice, which I think is really where the show shines, where they just experiment with different genres and tones, but they fully commit to it. But I don't know, I just found it charming how much the universe had changed over this very small thing. I never knew I needed to see a blonde-haired Nebula or Thanos petting a dog, but this episode gave it to me, and I'm pretty glad I saw it. At number 3, I have what if the world lost its mightiest heroes. This episode was the first time where I feel like the writers truly utilized the fact that they have no limits here and genuinely thought about the ripple effects of the changed events. For example, Thor dies in this episode, so Loki and this big Asgardian army comes to investigate, and I'm like, yeah, that is probably what would happen, and I'm glad they utilized that. The whole episode is giving off this really cool murder mystery vibe where I thought it was pretty investing. The deaths were always unexpected and even a bit gruesome.
That's nasty.
And the writers did an amazing job of constantly keeping the tension high. The action is very entertaining, the animation is great, and the overall look and vibe of this episode is very nice. And the twist is that it's actually Hank Pym who's been killing the Avengers because he's trying to avenge his daughter, Hope. It then leads to this really cool action sequence where Loki ends up actually using his powers to its full extent and just beats the crap out of Hank. It really shows how much of a threat Loki really is, and how smart and ahead of the curve Fury is. My only complaint is that you can't really guess who the murderer is without using your previous MCU knowledge, which isn't a big deal, but I think it would have been cool if we could have guessed who it was from the episode itself. But overall, I think this was a great episode of What If. At number 2, I have what if Doctor Strange lost his heart instead of his hands. I don't love this episode or think it's a masterpiece like the general consensus does, but I enjoy it and I like the overall premise of Doctor Strange losing someone he loves instead of his hands getting damaged. With the overall theme of the episode just showing how people process grief differently and that the different lengths we could go for the people we love. The episode is tragic, somber, well shot, and animated, and the voice acting is generally a bit better here. My main issue with this episode though is the relationship between Christine and Doctor Strange. They were hardly a thing in the original movie, and all we can see is that they probably dated in the past and are just friends now. So it's a little odd watching a what if about them where the entire episode's basis is their relationship when we've never really seen Doctor Strange care this much about Christine. And sure, it's a what if in alternate universe. So perhaps Doctor Strange and Christine are in love in this universe, or maybe Doctor Strange has immense unrequited love for her that he's hiding, or maybe Doctor Strange didn't really love her in those instances and her dying made him realize how much he really loved her. I don't really know because it's not explicitly stated that what the relationship here in this episode. It just shows that Doctor Strange really loves Christine. It's important to know whether Strange developed these feelings after she died or whether they were already in love because I need to know Strange's exact emotions to properly sympathize with what he's going through. Because I could believe Strange would go through something like this, I just don't feel it. I think what could have helped is to just dedicate a minute or two to either visualize what exactly their relationship is, or even just state it in some exposition. That way I could connect a bit more with this tragedy instead of just going along with it. Another issue I have is that this what if scenario is something that could happen rather than something that would happen as a result of the one change. To elaborate, Doctor Strange may end up going insane to try to bring Christine back, or he could just not go insane. This is strengthened in this episode because there is quite literally another Doctor Strange in this universe that went through the same thing but instead didn't go insane. Which isn't a huge deal, I guess, because again, it's a what if, but something I would want more out of this series are direct and sensible consequences as a result of that one change. But ultimately, I liked how the story ended up unfolding. I expected the good Doctor Strange to prevail over the evil one, but the evil Doctor Strange ended up winning. We got to see that he ended up succeeding in bringing Christine back. However, it was at the cost of literally the entire universe. Strange then has to live in eternal despair with how he destroyed the universe and that he failed in what he was trying to do. And worse, he brought Christine back just long enough for her to see how much of a monster he became. The episode served more as a dark cautionary tale about how we need to move forward, and I appreciate that it didn't opt for a more happy ending. So even though I had a few issues with it, I still really enjoyed what the episode was going for. The stronger stuff like the voice acting, the animation, and again, holy god, the art direction is astounding in this episode, with so many stunning visuals that are pretty entrancing. All in all, there's more than enough good in here to sort of compensate for all the other issues I have with this episode. At number 1, I have What If Ultron won? I really enjoyed this episode. One thing I didn't really like about the MCU was how short-lived Ultron really was. I remember Ultron being an incredible threat to the Avengers in various cartoons before the movie, and James Spader gave him a horrifying cadence. Unfortunately, Spader doesn't return to voice him, but it doesn't really hinder the episode, to be honest. The premise is simply, what if Ultron beat literally everyone, and we get to see that he nuked Earth and even just one-shot Thanos? I guess my boy Vision was just holding back an Infinity War? Okay, I see you. And then afterwards he went to other planets to exterminate all life. We get to see the Guardians, Captain Marvel, my boy Korg, and they all end up losing because Ultron has all the Infinity Stones and literally blows out planets with complete ease. I just really love how this episode delved into this intergalactic side of the MCU, where there's really no limits as to what could happen here, and I love that. However, we also get to spend half the episode with Black Widow and Hawkeye, which I think was some really good writing in order to ground the viewer a bit more after seeing all these intergalactic battles, which I also think is pretty cool as they're the most underpowered Avengers, so the fact that they're the only ones left are pretty cool in my opinion. Then later on in the episode we get to see the Watcher just can't keep his big mouth shut as his narration ends up alerting Ultron of his presence, which I thought was really cool, which then leads to a fight between Ultron and the Watcher, where the fight ends up breaking realities and destroying galaxies, and I think the animators, storyboard artists, and everyone behind this episode just had a lot of freedom to make a bunch of cool stuff, which I really enjoyed. Meanwhile, Black Widow and Hawkeye are on a secret spy mission to find Arnim Zola so that he can hack into Ultron and destroy all his bots. The episode surprisingly gets really beautiful and emotional as Hawkeye ends up sacrificing himself to save Natasha, and he goes out in this glorious frame as he dives headfirst into the Ultron bots. Overall, the episode felt very grand, epic, action-packed, and very emotional. Every frame of the episode is honestly quite beautiful, which just goes to show how important art direction really is. I watched this episode twice and I never really got bored of it, and despite the fact that its sequel episode wasn't great, I don't think it detracted from this episode. In conclusion, this series was pretty mixed for the most part. Didn't love it, didn't hate it. It's just disappointing seeing the scenarios they chose and the execution of them, especially seeing online how many great pitches people have for the show and the endless amount of interesting concepts they could go with. And dang, some of y'all are savages. So that'll be it for my rankings and thoughts of What If. What did you guys think of my rankings? I'm sure everyone's list will be a little different because the episodes are pretty radically different from each other tonally and conceptually, but I'd love to know your guys' list down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed today's video, please remember to leave a like and subscribe. With all that being said, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Peace.